There's an uncomfortable truth most men never hear. Some men aren't better looking than you. They aren't richer. They aren't kinder. They don't try harder. Yet when they disappear, women can't let go. Not because of what those men do, but because of what they leave behind. An emotional gap, a silence that feels wrong, a shift in her nervous system that tells her something is missing. While you're trying more, texting more, giving more, another man does less. He steps back, and suddenly, she thinks about him even more. This isn't a trick. It's not manipulation. And it's not dating advice you can copy and paste. It's one principle, one psychological truth. When you understand it, you stop chasing women altogether. Because attraction doesn't come from effort. It comes from emotional gravity. And here's the dangerous part. If you get this wrong, you don't create desire. You create imbalance, confusion, emotional chaos. So the real question isn't how to make her want you. It's this: why does she feel unsettled when you're gone? Stay with me. Because once you understand this one thing, you'll never see attraction the same way again. Most men believe attraction works like a scoreboard. Do more things right, and you earn more points. Be more attentive. Be more available. Be more consistent. Be nicer. And eventually, she'll choose you. That belief feels logical. It feels fair. And it's exactly why so many men lose. Because attraction doesn't reward effort. It responds to leverage. Here's the uncomfortable truth most men never hear clearly. Want is optional. A woman can want many things at the same time. She can want attention, affection, stability, excitement, reassurance, novelty. She can want you and still replace you without hesitation. Want feels good, but it doesn't bind. It doesn't anchor. It doesn't create gravity. Anything that exists at the level of want can be swapped out the moment something slightly better appears. A better feeling, a better moment, a better option. And modern dating is full of options. This is why effort is such a trap. Men assume that effort creates value, but effort without leverage does the opposite. It communicates availability, predictability, replaceability. When you give freely without friction, you quietly teach her one dangerous lesson: your presence is not essential. Think about how quickly desire fades when something becomes guaranteed. Music you once loved becomes background noise when it's always playing. Attention that's constant stops registering. Approval that costs nothing loses weight. This isn't cruelty. It's how the nervous system works. The human brain is wired to prioritize what feels scarce, uncertain, or consequential. What's optional gets deprioritized. What's guaranteed gets ignored. And this is where most men confuse being nice with being irreplaceable. Nice is safe. Nice is agreeable. Nice is easy to access. Nice listens, adapts, accommodates, explains, reassures. Nice removes tension. Nice smooths every emotional edge. And while that may create comfort, comfort alone doesn't create attachment. It creates familiarity. Familiarity is calm, but calm is not the same as desire. You can be kind, respectful, consistent, emotionally available, and still be forgettable, because none of those qualities force the nervous system to register loss when you're gone. This is why men who do everything right often get replaced by men who appear to do far less. Not because the second man is better, but because his presence isn't free, his attention isn't guaranteed, his approval isn't automatic, his availability has weight, and weight creates leverage. Here's the part most men resist. Effort only matters when it's selective. When effort is given indiscriminately, it loses meaning. When attention is always on, it becomes background noise. When emotional availability has no boundaries, it teaches her that access to you requires no investment, and when access costs nothing, it's never protected. Men often tell themselves a comforting story. She'll appreciate me eventually. She'll realize how good I am. She'll see I'm different. But attraction doesn't reward patience. It responds to impact. A woman doesn't ask herself, who tries the hardest? She asks herself something far more instinctive. How do I feel when he's not here? If your absence doesn't register emotionally, your presence isn't anchoring anything. And that's the real danger of trying too hard. You think you're building connection, but you're actually removing contrast. You smooth out every edge. You eliminate tension. You fill every silence. You make yourself endlessly accessible, and in doing so, you remove the very conditions that allow desire to form. Desire needs space. It needs uncertainty. It needs emotional consequence. Without those, attraction has no reason to hold on. This is why effort without leverage turns into a liability. It positions you as an option, not a necessity, a comfort, not a force, a presence that can be appreciated and still replaced. And once a woman categorizes you as optional, the dynamic is already decided. Not consciously, not maliciously, neurologically. At that point, no amount of extra effort will restore leverage. Trying harder only confirms what she already feels, that losing you wouldn't cost her anything she can't replace. This is the brutal truth most men never confront honestly. Being chosen is not the goal, because if you're trying to become the one she chooses, you've already positioned yourself beneath the process. Selection implies comparison. Comparison implies replaceability. And replaceable men don't get chased. They get evaluated. They get rotated. They get outgrown. So here's the cliffhanger you need to sit with before we go any further. If your strategy is to become the best option, you're still playing a losing game. Because the men women can't let go of aren't chosen. They're felt. And in the next chapter, we're going to define the one thing that creates that feeling clearly, precisely, and without games. The moment you understand it, effort stops being your weapon. Positioning becomes your power. Let's strip away the mystery now. No suspense. No vague language. The one thing that changes everything is this: become emotionally non-replaceable. Not impressive. Not admired. Not liked. Non-replaceable. That word matters more than anything else you've heard about attraction. Because attraction doesn't collapse when a better option appears. It collapses when your role can be filled by someone else. Most men are replaceable not because they're bad men, but because the emotional position they occupy is common. They offer what many men offer. They create feelings that are easy to source elsewhere. They regulate nothing essential. And when nothing essential is lost, nothing pulls her back. So, let's be very clear about what this one thing is not. This is not manipulation. You're not pushing buttons or running scripts. You're not withholding to provoke anxiety. You're not playing hot and cold games. This is also not game. Game is behavior. This is position. Game is what you do. Position is where you sit in her emotional system. And that's the distinction most men never understand. You don't become irreplaceable by acting a certain way. You become irreplaceable by occupying a role her nervous system can't easily swap out. Attraction doesn't live in logic. It lives in regulation. Human beings unconsciously seek people who stabilize, stimulate, or organize their internal state. We move toward what soothes us. We orbit what activates us. We return to what restores balance. This isn't romantic. It's biological. A woman doesn't chase a man because he's impressive on paper. She chases what her system associates with relief, excitement, grounding, or tension release. And when you become the source of one of those experiences, something subtle happens. Comparison stops. She's no longer asking, "Is there someone better?" She's asking, "Why do I feel off when he's not here?" That question is the beginning of chasing. Because once your absence creates emotional consequence, your presence gains weight. This is why being emotionally non-replaceable has nothing to do with doing more. In fact, doing more often makes you easier to replace. When you over-explain, over-invest, over-validate, over-perform, you flatten the emotional experience. You make yourself predictable. Predictability feels safe, but safety alone doesn't create attachment. Attachment forms when your presence changes her internal state in a way she can't recreate on demand. That's the key. Not pleasure, not approval, not comfort, regulation. When she's around you, something inside her shifts. Her mind quiets, her body relaxes, or her energy lifts, or her focus sharpens. And when you're gone, that shift disappears. That disappearance is what her system notices. This is why trying to be everything never works. If you try to be endlessly supportive, endlessly exciting, endlessly validating, endlessly available, you dilute your impact. You become emotionally generic. Irreplaceable men are specific. They don't fill every gap. They fill one, and they fill it cleanly. Here's the hard truth most men resist. You don't get to decide what role you play. Her nervous system does. You only get to decide whether you pay attention to that role or keep performing blindly. Men who fail at attraction usually fail for one reason. They're focused on being chosen instead of being felt. They want reassurance. They want clarity. They want verbal confirmation. But emotional attachment doesn't announce itself verbally. It shows up as behavior, checking in, reaching out, re-engaging after distance, feeling unsettled when access is removed. Those behaviors don't come from persuasion. They come from dependency. And dependency isn't a dirty word here. It's a structural one. Dependency simply means her emotional equilibrium partially relies on access to you. That's it. When that reliance exists, chasing becomes internal, quiet, often unconscious. She doesn't think, "I need him." She thinks, "Something feels off," and her system pulls her toward the source of balance. This is why the one thing isn't about learning lines or techniques. It's about understanding position. Where do you sit in her emotional landscape? Are you a bonus or a regulator? An option or a stabilizer? A pleasant addition or a reference point? Most men never ask these questions. They assume attraction grows through accumulation. More time, more effort, more proof. But attraction doesn't accumulate. It locks in. And it locks in the moment your presence becomes hard to substitute. This is why some men can disappear for days and trigger longing, while others disappear and barely register. The difference isn't intention, it's placement. And once you see this clearly, something shifts in you. You stop trying to earn desire. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop performing for reactions. Because you're no longer asking, "How do I make her want me?" You're asking, "What role do I occupy when I'm gone?" And that question changes everything. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into this distinction. Because women don't chase men. They chase emotional states. And once you understand which state she associates with you, attraction stops feeling confusing. It starts feeling inevitable. This is where most men misunderstand attraction at its core. They believe women become attached to people, personalities, traits, effort, consistency. They don't. Women become attached to emotional states. That single distinction explains almost every confusing experience men have in dating. When a woman says, "I miss you," she isn't missing your voice, your jokes, or the way you text "good morning." She's missing how her internal state shifts when you're around. Calmer, more alive, more grounded, more stimulated, more centered. Your presence changed something inside her. Your absence removed it. And that removal is what her nervous system reacts to. This is why two men can behave in completely opposite ways and get completely different results. One man is attentive, consistent, emotionally available. He listens, he reassures, he shows up. And when he's gone, nothing changes. Another man is imperfect, inconsistent, sometimes distant. But when he leaves, her mood shifts, her thoughts loop, her attention drifts back. The difference isn't character, it's regulation. Human beings unconsciously gravitate toward whatever regulates their emotional world. We move toward what restores balance when something inside us feels off. This isn't romance. It's survival wiring. Your nervous system doesn't care about logic. It cares about relief. And when a woman associates that relief with you, attraction stops being a choice. It becomes a pull. Here's where men get trapped. They assume effort creates attachment, so they try harder. They give more reassurance, more availability, more explanation, more emotional presence. But effort alone doesn't change emotional states. In fact, over-effort often neutralizes them. When your presence becomes constant, predictable, always accessible, the nervous system stops registering it as meaningful. It fades into baseline. This is why absence matters. Not ghosting, not punishment, not withdrawal. Contrast. Contrast is what allows the system to notice difference. You don't realize how warm a room is until you step outside. You don't notice silence until sound stops. You don't feel emotional relief until tension is removed. When you're always there, there's no contrast. When there's no contrast, there's no imprint. This is why emotional states attach to moments, not duration. A single conversation can create more attachment than months of consistency if it shifts her internal world in a way she can't recreate alone. Let me give you a concrete example. Two men take her on dates. The first one plans everything perfectly. He's attentive. He checks in constantly. He makes sure she's comfortable. She enjoys the evening. She feels safe. The second man doesn't perform. He's present, grounded, unrushed. Around him, she notices something subtle. She talks less. She breathes deeper. Her body relaxes. He doesn't try to entertain her. He doesn't chase reactions. He allows space. That space creates regulation. Later that night, she doesn't replay the logistics of the date. She replays how she felt. And when she wakes up the next morning, that feeling is gone. That absence is what lingers. This is why women chase emotional states, not men. They chase relief. They chase stimulation. They chase grounding. They chase contrast. And the men they return to are the men who consistently create one of those experiences without forcing it. Here's another hard truth. When you explain too much, when you over-clarify, when you fill every silence, you prevent her nervous system from doing any work. And imagination does more work than effort ever could. Imagination fills gaps. Imagination amplifies emotion. Imagination turns moments into attachment. When everything is spelled out, nothing echoes. This is why mystery isn't about secrecy. It's about not collapsing the emotional space too quickly. The moment she has to feel instead of analyze, attraction deepens. And this is also why trying to convince her never works. You can't talk someone into attachment. You can only create an experience their system doesn't want to lose. That's why chasing behavior backfires. The more you pursue, the more you flatten the emotional contrast. You're always there, always available, always explaining. And because there's no emotional consequence to losing you, there's nothing for her system to respond to. Men often ask, how do I make her miss me? That question misses the point. She doesn't miss you. She misses the state you created. And states aren't created by trying harder. They're created by presence. by restraint, by groundedness, by allowing space to exist. This is why the men who leave the deepest imprint often feel confusing to women. They didn't do more. They shifted something. And once a woman's nervous system associates you with that shift, attraction no longer depends on persuasion. It becomes reflexive, automatic, internal. In the next chapter, we'll break down the 4 emotional voids that drive this process. Not abstract concepts, not personality types, but specific emotional gaps that, when filled correctly, turn attraction into gravity. Attraction doesn't come from what a woman says she wants. It comes from what her nervous system is quietly missing. Every woman carries at least one emotional gap. Not because she's broken, not because she lacks something, but because modern life constantly demands performance. She's expected to be composed, competent, emotionally aware, independent, desirable, often all at the same time. Over time, something gets neglected. That neglected space becomes an emotional void. And emotional voids pull attention without asking for permission. This is where most men go wrong. They try to become everything. Instead of recognizing what's missing, you don't need to fill every gap. You only need to notice the one her system is already hungry for. Let's break this down clearly, slowly, and precisely. The first void is validation, but not the kind most men give. Validation doesn't mean constant praise. It doesn't mean reassurance on demand. And it definitely doesn't mean proving her worth. When validation is always available, it disappears. Women receive attention everywhere. Online, at work, in dating. Because it's everywhere, it carries very little weight. Validation only becomes powerful when it's selective, when it reflects standards, when it's given with intention, when it's not guaranteed, when a woman doesn't know exactly when she'll receive your approval. Her nervous system stays alert. Anticipation builds. Attention sharpens. The emotional signal stays alive. This isn't about withholding affection. It's about not giving it automatically. Selective validation feels meaningful, not manipulative. It signals that your attention has value. The second void is excitement. And this is often misunderstood. Most women aren't bored because their lives are empty. They're bored because everything feels emotionally flat. Same routines, same conversations, same predictable interactions. Excitement isn't chaos. It's contrast. A man who introduces emotional variation stands out immediately. Unexpected pauses, playful tension, moments that don't follow a script. Excitement works because it wakes the nervous system up. Patterns fade into the background. Contrast demande attention. This is why mystery holds more power than explanation. Why teasing lingers longer than compliments. Why unpredictability feels alive. When a woman associates that feeling with you, your presence stops being neutral. The third void is escape, and it's the quietest one. Most women are always managing something. Managing impressions, managing responsibilities, managing expectations. Even rest often feels monitored. When a man becomes a space where she doesn't have to perform, something softens. Her body relaxes. Her breathing slows. The internal noise fades. Escape doesn't mean fixing her problems. It means temporarily removing her from them. You become an environment where nothing is demanded. That kind of relief is rare, and rare experiences create attachment. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're felt deeply. The fourth void is challenge. And this is where many men get confused. Challenge is not coldness. It's not arrogance. And it's not emotional distance. Challenge is resistance. Most men are easy. Easy to read. Easy to access. Easy to win over. They rush to please. They rush to prove. They rush to adapt. Ease removes tension. And tension is what keeps attention engaged. A man with standards introduces friction naturally. He doesn't bend immediately. He doesn't chase approval. He doesn't reshape himself to be chosen. His time and attention aren't automatic. That selectivity gives weight to his presence. Scarcity isn't absence. It's intentional availability. Here's what most men never realize. These voids don't work in isolation. The strongest attraction loops are built from balance. Relief paired with tension. Safety paired with pursuit. Escape calms her system. Challenge keeps it engaged. Excitement stimulates. Selective validation anchors. When one man consistently fills the dominant gap in her emotional world, attachment forms quietly. When he fills too, carefully and without overdoing it, chasing begins internally. But this is also where men sabotage themselves. They try to be everything at once. More validating, more exciting, more comforting, more distant, and in trying to do everything, they dilute their impact. You don't create attraction by adding more behaviors. You create it by occupying the right role cleanly. The key isn't listening to what she says she wants. It's observing what her emotional system reacts to. Pay attention to patterns. When she talks about feeling bored, her system is craving stimulation. When she sounds overwhelmed, it's seeking relief. When she subtly looks for reassurance, there's a validation gap. When she seems unimpressed by attention, she's missing resistance. Once you see the gap, you stop guessing. You stop performing. You respond to an imbalance that already exists. And imbalance, when addressed correctly, always pulls attention toward its solution. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the line most men cross without noticing. The moment attraction quietly turns into obsession, and why restraint is what separates powerful men from destructive ones. There is a line most men never see until it's already behind them. Attraction doesn't announce when it crosses into something darker. There's no warning sign, no dramatic shift. It happens quietly. A woman stops wanting access to you and starts needing it to feel balanced. And the moment you become the primary source of emotional regulation, you hold real power, not symbolic power, not fantasy alpha power, psychological power, the kind that can pull someone toward you even when they're conflicted, even when they know better, even when logic tells them to step away. This is where things become dangerous, because power doesn't change who you are. It amplifies it. in the hands of an ungrounded man, this power turns into manipulation. He enjoys the chase too much. He withholds to feel important. He feeds dependency because it soothes his own insecurity. At first, it feels intoxicating. She reaches out more. She checks in. She feels anxious when he's distant, and he mistakes that anxiety for desire. But anxiety is not attraction. It's imbalance. And imbalance, when exploited, collapses relationships instead of strengthening them. This is how attraction slides into obsession, not because the woman is unstable, not because she's weak, but because the emotional system was pulled too far in one direction without release. The nervous system can tolerate tension. It cannot tolerate chronic uncertainty. When relief never comes, desire mutates. It turns into fear of loss, hyper-focus, emotional volatility, and once fear enters the dynamic, trust begins to erode. This is why men who win the chase often end up losing the connection. They cross the line without knowing it existed. Here's the part most men don't want to hear. If a woman feels emotionally destabilized around you, you didn't create attraction. You created dependency. And dependency without safety always turns toxic. The strongest men understand something subtle. Attraction requires tension. Connection requires release. You cannot hold tension indefinitely without damage. A grounded man knows when to apply pressure and when to let it dissolve. He knows when to step back and when to step forward. He doesn't enjoy watching someone unravel for his validation. He doesn't measure his worth by how deeply he can hook someone. That's weakness disguised as confidence. True strength is restraint. This is where many men confuse power with control. Control is forcing outcomes. Power is allowing choice. A man who understands emotional leverage doesn't remove a woman's agency. He doesn't trap her inside feelings she can't regulate. He creates pull, not panic, because panic destroys attraction over time. You can see this pattern clearly when you look back at failed dynamics. At first, everything felt intense, electric, magnetic. Then, slowly, the connection became heavy. Conversations felt charged. Distance felt dangerous. Small changes triggered big reactions. That wasn't love deepening. That was regulation failing. Attraction thrives on balance. Obsession feeds on imbalance. And imbalance always demands correction. This is why men who chase intensity often burn everything they touch. They mistake emotional volatility for depth. They mistake anxiety for passion. They mistake attachment wounds for chemistry. But real attraction doesn't destabilize. It organizes. It brings coherence to the emotional system, not chaos. A grounded man understands that his role is not to fill every void permanently. He is a presence, not a crutch. He knows when to create distance without punishment, when to offer reassurance without collapsing tension, when to remain steady instead of reactive. That steadiness is what keeps attraction clean. And here's the paradox. The men who are capable of creating obsession are the same men who never need it, because they aren't seeking validation through influence. They don't need someone else's dependency to feel secure. They already have internal regulation, purpose, boundaries, a life that doesn't orbit attention. This internal structure is what prevents abuse of power. Without it, emotional leverage becomes dangerous. You start using distance to punish, silence to provoke, attention as currency. And once those patterns form, the relationship stops being about connection. It becomes about control. That's when resentment begins. The woman feels confused, pulled and pushed, drawn and unsettled. The man feels powerful for a while, then trapped, because dependency is a prison for both sides. This is why the most dangerous men aren't the ones with no influence. They're the ones with influence and no restraint. Men who understand attraction but not responsibility. Men who know how to create pull but not how to hold it cleanly. Attraction without ethics becomes extraction. You take more than you give. You destabilize without repairing. You create hunger without nourishment. And eventually, the system breaks. Either she pulls away to protect herself, or the connection implodes under its own weight. This is why mastery isn't measured by how many women chase you. It's measured by how responsibly you handle the pull you create. A strong man doesn't aim to be unforgettable at any cost. He aims to be steady, because steadiness sustains attraction. And this is where we draw the line clearly. Creating emotional gravity is not about trapping someone in it. It's about being a point of reference she can move toward or away from without losing herself. That freedom is what keeps desire alive. In the next chapter, we're going to step out of psychology and into something older, deeper, and more stable, the Stoic frame. Because without internal control, external influence will always corrupt you. If everything we've talked about so far sounds powerful, there's one final truth you need to understand clearly. None of it works without internal control. Emotional leverage without self-mastery doesn't create attraction. It creates chaos. This is where Stoicism enters the picture, not as philosophy for books, but as a practical framework for how a man carries himself in the world. Because the men who naturally create attraction without trying aren't running strategies. They're grounded. They have an internal center that doesn't shift with external approval. They don't chase validation because they don't outsource their stability. And that internal structure changes everything. At the core of the Stoic frame is one simple idea: you control your actions. You do not control outcomes. Most men live backwards. They adjust their behavior to manipulate results. They say things to get reactions. They give to receive. They withdraw to provoke. That's not power. That's dependency disguised as control. A Stoic man understands that attraction is a byproduct, not a goal. He focuses on who he is, not who he's trying to become in someone else's eyes. This immediately changes how he shows up. He's present, but not performative, attentive, but not anxious, interested, but not attached, because his sense of worth isn't negotiated in real time. This is what gives his presence weight. When a man isn't trying to extract a response, his attention feels different. It's calm. It's grounded. It doesn't seek reassurance. and the nervous system responds to that stability instinctively. This is why Stoic indifference is often misunderstood. It's not emotional coldness. It's emotional independence. A Stoic man feels deeply, but he's not ruled by what he feels. He doesn't suppress emotion. He regulates it. And regulation is what allows him to apply tension without cruelty, distance without punishment, presence without neediness. This is what keeps attraction clean. Attraction thrives when there is freedom inside the connection. The moment a woman feels responsible for regulating a man's emotions, desire collapses. But when she senses that his emotional world is self-contained, she can relax. She doesn't feel pressured to reassure him. She doesn't feel trapped by his reactions. His steadiness becomes a place of safety. This is why men who are truly grounded don't fear walking away. Not because they're indifferent to connection, but because they're not attached to outcomes. They know that forcing something to continue only creates resentment. Walking away calmly, without bitterness, is one of the clearest expressions of self-respect. And self-respect is deeply attractive. Stoicism teaches a man to locate his power internally, not in attention, not in approval, not in emotional reactions. When you stop chasing outcomes, something paradoxical happens. Outcomes start chasing you, because desperation evaporates. You no longer perform to be chosen. You no longer negotiate your value. You no longer fear losing access. Your presence becomes optional but never desperate. And paradoxically, that's what makes it hard to replace. This is where the earlier chapters come full circle. Emotional gravity doesn't come from techniques. It comes from positioning. And positioning is impossible without boundaries. A Stoic man knows where he ends and where others begin. He doesn't over-explain. He doesn't over-invest. He doesn't overreact. He allows space. Space is what allows emotional states to form, deepen, and echo. Without space, attraction suffocates. This is why silence can be powerful when it comes from restraint, and destructive when it comes from insecurity. The difference is internal stability. Stoicism isn't about becoming distant. It's about becoming unshakable. When your internal state isn't hijacked by external events, you don't need to manipulate emotional dynamics. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of chase. And this is what keeps attraction sustainable. A man with a Stoic frame doesn't try to fill every emotional void. He recognizes which one he naturally occupies and stays anchored there. He doesn't force connection. He allows it to develop organically. This restraint is what prevents attraction from tipping into obsession, because he knows when to step back, when to soften, when to release tension, not because he's afraid of losing influence, but because he respects the balance. This is the mark of maturity. The Stoics called it temperance, the ability to hold power without abusing it. And that's the difference between a man who creates fleeting intensity and a man who creates lasting pull. Without this frame, emotional leverage corrodes character. With it, attraction becomes stable, ethical, and grounded. This is why the strongest men don't chase being unforgettable. They chase integrity. They know that influence without integrity always turns destructive. And now we arrive at the final truth. The one thing that makes women chase isn't something you do to them. It's something you build within yourself. Emotional self-sufficiency. The ability to be present without need. To engage without attachment. To walk away without resentment. When you stop confusing effort with value, you stop chasing approval. When you stop chasing approval, you stop broadcasting insecurity. And when insecurity disappears, attraction has space to form. This is why rejection no longer feels personal. You don't collapse. You don't argue. You don't chase closure. You simply remain centered. And that centeredness is felt, not intellectually, viscerally. This is what puts you back in control. Not control over her. Control over yourself. Your reactions, your boundaries, your availability, your standards. And paradoxically, that's what makes attraction sustainable instead of desperate. A man who doesn't beg isn't ignored. A man who doesn't chase isn't